So Fast X is the 10th entry in the Fast and the Furious saga. And I feel like I almost got to mention like the Fast and the Furious franchise because like every new film that comes out, they always got to put like a new title in it, like the Fate of the Furious, or or they just literally just call it F9, like not even like Fast 9 or Fast and Furious 9 or FF9. I believe it's just called just F9, and so now we got like Fast 10. So it's like, oh, hope you kids know your Roman numerals. Now, this film has been like a little bit divisive with people. Obviously, like if you're tired of the Fast and Furious films, you don't really dig the car chases. You've never been about like the bombastic nature of this saga. You're probably not gonna like this film, like all the Fast and Furious films. That being said, if you have been following the saga, and I say this as someone who didn't really care for Fate of the Furious and F9, like I don't feel they're bad films. I just kind of feel like after Fast 5, Fast and Furious 6, and Furious 7, I felt like 8 and 9 just kind of like plateaued. It's just kind of like, okay, it's par for the course. Because like F8, you had like zombie cars and you had the submarine that they had to like disable. And then with F9, you have what everyone was expecting. You had street cars go up into space. So at that point, it's like, what more can you do with it? And thankfully, having like not liked those films, Fast X actually renewed my faith. Like I honestly think this is probably like one of my favorites of all, like the like past like I have like a little bit of like a soft spot for like the first film, and the fourth Fast and the Furious film I kind of like, but this is probably up there as one of my favorite ones. Fast X is definitely probably... I had a lot more fun. I will say this. I had a lot more fun with Fast X than I ever did with F8 and F9. And the main reason, like there's a lot of contributing factors that make me love this entry, but the number one reason is Jason Momoa. Jason Momoa plays the villain of this picture. He plays Dante, who's a character who does have a relation to a past villain, specifically the villain from Fast 5. So they have a little bit of like they have a callback to Fast 5, like, oh, remember these events? Well, guess who else was there? Jason Momoa. And he wants revenge. So at that point I thought, okay, it's just going to be, he wants revenge, so he's scowling. He's going to be like the other villains, like, like Jason Statham and Charlize Theron. They're just kind of going to be a little bit of like tongue-in-cheek, but like very like, typical sinister terrorist. But no, Jason Momoa, instead of just going down that similar route, he switches things up entirely by playing basically a comic book villain. You're gonna hear a lot of people talk about it. Like, Jason Momoa is pretty much playing like the villain you would expect in a superhero movie, just because he is playing up this character as like a terrorist who knows that he's in a Fast and the Furious film. So he's giddy about everything. He's excited to get revenge on Dom. Like his vicious plans, which target his family members, he gets all excited about. He has an eccentric style. Like he puts his hair up in buns, and he paints his nails. He wears ridiculous outfits. He acts very flamboyant around everyone, and is just having too much fun chewing up the scenery, like more than any other character. To the point where it's almost like garish, but I kind of like that because it makes you realize, like, oh, this is not like the typical villains who are usually in the Fast and Furious films. This guy feels like a genuine psychopath. And like the perfect example of this is like there's a scene where he kills two of his henchmen and then hacks a computer. Now this scene could have just gone straight with him just like, killing them, doing the hacking, barely saying a word, scene's over. Instead, he kills these two guys off screen. He props up their bodies with like tape, paints their nails, and has one-sided conversations with them while he enacts the next part of his evil scheme. And it's just that's that sort of like delightful psychopath type of villain that you kind of hope that more action films would have. And I feel like the Fast and the Furious films are just ridiculous enough that it can make this type of character work, where he is ridiculous, he is over the top, but he's also a major threat, and you can buy him as a threat. in this type of scenario. So yeah, so Jason Momoa is the big draw, but thankfully there's a lot of other characters here. Most of them work. Even though most of them are kind of doing what we expect from them. Like, you have Vin Diesel back as Dominic Toretto, and, of course, the hallmark of the Fast and Furious saga is all about family. Family is the most important thing, so he starts off the film with his son. His son is getting closer to driving age. Like, he's not ready for a learner's permit yet, but that doesn't stop Dom. He realizes he lives a dangerous life. So, kids got to drive a car. So, and also, it's Dom. He's not going to wait for his kid to be able to get a permit. He's going to get that kid driving right away. So Dom cares about his kid. He cares about the rest of his crew there. Like Letty, played by Michelle Rodriguez. They have their obligatory, lovey-dovey moment. But then once the action picks up, and there's a threat to the world, we have all the characters split here. And I feel like they're divided up enough where you can have fun with them. And some of that, is due to the fact that this film runs about 2.5 hours long. But it uses that time well with all the characters assembled. Because with every Fast and Furious film, they always expand the ensemble cast here. It always grows, even when they kill off characters, like the past few films have killed off characters, and they do kill off characters in this entry as well. It always feels like it keeps expanding. It gets bigger and bigger, and they have to try to find stuff to do with all the characters. And thankfully they do. It feels like there is enough going on where no character gets shoved to the wayside. In particular, with Letty, it would seem like a lot of these films struggle to find stuff to do with Rodriguez, but Letty actually has one of the best fight scenes in this. At one point, she's captured by the agency, who you might remember. The agency, they kind of worked with Dom and his street racing crew to save the world when they were run by Mr. Nobody, but since Mr. Nobody's out of the picture, the agency's got a little corrupt. So Letty gets kidnapped, and she has to work alongside Cypher, played by Charlize Theron. And, they eventually work together, but they also have a kick-ass fight sequence between the two of them that involves them just slamming each other, punching each other across the face, and at one point using lasers. And it's easily one of the best fight scenes in the film. Another group that you follow, you have Roman, played by Tyrese Gibson, and Tej, played by Ludacris, who are just the perfect comedic duo. Roman is kind of a doofus who wants to assume leadership, but always makes mistakes, and Tej is an expert hacker who always kind of insults Roman, and Roman kind of fumbles his plans every now and again. They're a great comedic duo, and they use them well here, especially with the fact that you have Roman wanting to prove himself more. So you kind of feel bad for the guy. You root for him, and you hope that he'll get to prove himself. And then acting as a little bit of an off to the side mediator, you have Natalie Emanuel as the hacker Ramsey. Here she is, just getting a few quips, and it would seem like she'd be there to balance them, but she mostly just kind of hangs back with with Han, played by she hangs back with Han, played by Sung Kang, and they're just kind of should we interfere? Nah, let's just hang back, because Ramsey mostly is just I don't want to get between these guys because they're crazy, and Han just snacks. Just hangs back, I love the fact that the film is aware of these trademarks and leans into them, because at one point Han just eats psychedelic muffins and has there's a little bit of fun had with it, not as much as you'd think, but I kind of get the fact that I kind of feel like Han is probably used to edibles by now. With how many times he snacks in these films, he's probably got to be used to it. So then, they have great chemistry, and they're off to the side. Dom is trying to track down Dante, while at the same time trying to protect his other family members from past films and get more information. And then you have, even more additional characters thrown into the mix. You have Brie Larson playing Tess, a member of the agency who doesn't quite agree with them. She's a bit of a turncoat. And she gets a little bit of her own character for how little time she has on screen. I love the fact that they establish her as this person who wears these ridiculous, she's got this very formal attire of a very dapper dressed agent, and then you look down at her shoes and she's got spikes on them, which is like a great little like callback. She's like, look, I'm gonna be professional at work, but I might need to kill someone later, so I'm gonna wear these spikes on my. And I love the fact that like the one time that she actually uses them like a lot is with like scraping up someone's car, specifically Jason Momoa's car, which leads to some great reactions. And then you have a few other characters who return here. Like I already mentioned, like Cypher returns, but you also have Jason Statham returning as Shaw. He has a pretty good fight scene with Han as well. So you have rivals coming together because they have a common enemy with Dante. So you have a great reason to throw them together. And then a few other characters you expect to pop in for a little bit of a cameo. You know, Helen Mirren pops up because, you know, she becomes another target, some first shot to save. Rita Morano just shows up to say, yeah, family's big. I'm not really going to do much, but family is important. And nothing says family more than Rita Morano. So, but yeah, like the film that has like enough going on to make them work. Of course, I'm mostly talking about the characters here. And the number one reason that everyone's going to be coming to this film is for the action scenes. And the action scenes are like, you can't help but wonder, like, you know, they've already sent like a car up into space. So where do you go from here? Well, you just try to make like the best damn car chases and the biggest ridiculous action scenes you can. The first set piece in particular is a lot of fun. It's basically the crew is trying to stop a giant bomb from blowing up the Vatican. But the bomb is a giant sphere that's on fire, that's rolling around Rome. So you have Dom and his crew basically smacking around this giant ball, which I'll be honest, this looks like a pinball game. If they make you pretty much could do this. You can make a Fast and the Furious pinball game framed entirely around the sequence. Just shape the whole board like Rome and make the ball kind of like shaped like the bomb in this film and just have like the bumpers be cars. It's because that's really what this is. It's a ridiculous sequence, which, you know, at this point you expect with the Fast and Furious films, where it's cars like smacking a rolling bomb around Rome, which is very much on brand for Fast and the Furious. Complete with all like the ridiculous things that you would expect. Like at one point, like Dom smacks his car into like a construction crane, and the crane is just perfectly positioned where it would smack into the bomb here. So yeah, there's a lot of like expected hallmarks that you have within a Fast and Furious film, as well as like some interesting touches that I've kind of noticed like from other action films. Like at one point, there's a scene where Dom has to save someone's car from exploding because of a bomb that's been placed underneath the car. Now, if anyone's seen the Transporter films, speaking of like other car chases, in the Transporter films, there is a scene exactly like this where a bomb is under the car and they have to find a way to get it off. And the way that it's removed is pretty much in Fast X. It's removed exactly the same way that it is in the Transporter movies. Which I kind of appreciate it because like it's ridiculous, but it's like, you know, it's kind of like it's classic ridiculous. It's like it's that weird over the top type of action that is so uproarious and bizarre. But at this point, you know, for like the 10th Fast and Furious film, you kind of expect it and you're kind of like rooting for it. In fact, at one point there's like a midair rescue scene, which at this point has kind of become expected in the films, where like someone has to fly out of a car and they jump into another car and someone saves them, or they smash into a windshield, and that happens here. And I saw this film with just like the perfect audience for this because they knew this scene was coming. They knew what was going to happen. They knew how it was going to end. And the way that it was framed, with just like giant explosions and like trucks smashing into each other and just being absurd with the way it's shot with the green screen, everyone was cheering in the audience. It's like, yes, this is absurd. It's ridiculous. It's over the top and it's explosive. And this is kind of what you want out of a Fast and Furious film at this point. Because like, look, like some of the people who are probably not going to like this film are going to be the people who be like, remember when the Fast and the Furious films were all about just street racing and it wasn't about bombs or submarines or the world ending or blowing up the Vatican, or blowing up dams and missiles flying through the air. Remember when it was just street racing? And it's like that was those days are long gone. That like those days have been gone since Fast Five. That was 5 films ago you were rooting for. In terms of like leaning into this aspect of what audiences have come to expect from Fast and Furious films, this one actually works because it uses a lot of the characters well. It has a lot of great action sequences that are firmly with tongue in cheek. You have Jason Momoa eating up the scenery, and how can I forget? Like you have John Cena returning as Jacob, who you might remember Dom's long lost brother, and they actually do a lot of fun stuff with him. You have Jacob looking after Dom's son, and he's basically trying to be the best uncle that he can be, while also piloting experimental craft and driving a car that shoots artillery shells. And those scenes are actually pretty sweet. I gotta admit that those scenes are actually a lot of fun. And I guess like that's the best way to describe this film. It's just like it knows how to have fun with as much as it throws into this film. Even for like having more additional characters. Like one of the standout characters who's interesting because like you're not sure if you can trust this guy or not is Alan Ritchson playing playing Ames, who's like the new leader of the agency, and this guy is up to no good. Just because of like the look of him and his demeanor, where it's like I don't trust Dom, I don't trust anyone, and like the agency has been too lenient on these guys. I'm gonna bring him in, so it's like you're not quite sure whether or not to trust this guy, and it's interesting how the film kind of like fluctuates with that character a little bit. Like you can kind of see the signs coming the more that the film goes along, but yeah, he's a fun kind of on again off again rival for Dom in this scenario. Now the film has been directed by Louis Latour, who he also did like the Now You See Me movies. And he definitely puts his little hallmark touches on this. You might remember like how in the Now You See Me movies there are those scenes where it's like they get an extreme close up and like the camera contorts to kind of like go down pipes and go up people's sleeves and all that. There's a great sequence at the climax here where it's just like you look at it and you're like, this is definitely the director's choice here, because like Lewis was replacing Justin Lin here, which I love Justin Lin's direction, but I honestly feel like Luis's direction kind of saves this, because I don't know how much of this was like his decision. Like, look, we have Jason Momoa, he's got to camp this stuff up like hardcore. Like, I imagine like probably like Justin Lin's original screenplay probably did have Jason Momoa playing it more straight, like as the serious brooding bad guy who would like sometimes make a quip here and there. I don't know for certain if that was the plan, but Momoa definitely makes it his own. But yeah, like when you get to that climax and there's a great scene where Dom engages the nitro and you see the camera go around the car and like up Dom's sleeve, you can see the veins. It goes down to his wrist. It goes on the key. It goes inside the car. It goes into the engine and into the nitro, and then the nitro goes out. It's just it goes on for so long, but it's like for the absurdity that happens within a Fast and the Furious film, it's on point. It's perfectly suited for this type of film. And the other reason that I love this film, and this is the reason that a lot of people are referring to this as kind of like the Infinity War or the Empire Strikes Back of the Fast and Furious films, is it's because it ends on a cliffhanger. And it's not like, and it's not one of those like, oh, what do we do now type of cliffhangers where it's just like the characters are reunited and they got to get back at that villain. It ends on kind of like like the Batman live action show would end on like a cliffhanger. It's like, what will Batman do in this scenario? Like they cut right before like the blade's about to like saw them in half and something like that. That's very much the case with Fast X. It ends at a point like almost like mid-action where you're just like, wait, what's gonna happen? So like it's beautiful for how like this film kind of has the audience by the balls, where they're gonna have to come back and see what's, because how could you not? Like it ends at like an uncertain moment where you're not sure what exactly happened to Dom and his crew. Like it cuts off at just the right point to make you concerned about what's going to happen next, which is beautiful. And also, like, people have already mentioned this too, that there's a mid-credit sequence in which there's even more cameos. So I'll say this, like, there's cameos by characters from other Fast and the Furious films who you might not be expecting to come back. But then again, maybe you are, because, like, you know, we saw Han come back from the dead for just the most bizarre reasons. So there's a lot of characters who come back from the dead. In fact, I won't spoil it, but, you know, if you've watched the Fast and Furious films, you can probably guess who's coming back for, like, the next Fast and Furious film. So in terms of, like, making it like more of like an all-encompassing Fast and Furious film, which taps into, you know, more of like its own lore and trying to weave all these different characters in here while throwing even more of them into the mix. Like even Scott Eastwood comes back here, and you have like Pete Davidson shows up at one point for a tiny role here. For making all these elements gel together, I was surprised how much it worked and how fun it was. So yeah, it like the way that I've been describing it is that, you know, this is like the Empire Strikes Back of the Fast and the Furious films, and that's honestly why this is probably my favorite film. You know, just because of the absurdity and the tension, the cliffhangers, the great car chases that are wonderfully absurd. But of course, if you need one reason to go see this film, more than any, like if you've never been big in the Fast and Furious films, the number one reason you need to see this film is for Jason Momoa. Just because he's the perfect villain. He is by far the best villain that we've ever had in the Fast and Furious film. And it's mostly just because he's having as much fun as you would expect the audience to be having with it. So yeah, Fast X is the greatest entry for Jason Momoa alone. And probably just all things considered, it's my favorite Fast and the Furious film.